So I join you and my colleagues to commend Mr. President that in these difficult times, when we don't really have money, that it is better to borrow for projects. It's better to borrow for infrastructure so that at the end of the day, we'll have something to see. And then we can pay through even the infrastructure. Repayment can be done through the infrastructure. So this is highly commendable. And I urge the Committee on Local and Foreign Debts to do a job and bring it back to us for expeditious approval.
I have always said the subsidy regime was unsustainable. We cannot continue supporting foreign refineries when we're an oil-producing country, keeping refineries open abroad while we're not doing our own. Today, we have a situation where we have our own domestic refinery. We're not importing petroleum products. We're even exporting to Europe, and this is very good for the economy. Secondly, we've removed the subsidy. We're not spending it. What we should now see is fiscal consolidation. You cannot remove wastages and continue borrowing. Higher thing, and I've said this before. So you need to see the benefits. So if you're not paying the subsidy and you've got the money, why are we still borrowing and borrowing? But what are we borrowing for?
If you are new here, please hit that subscribe button. On the 29th of May 2023, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu stood before Nigeria and delivered what would become one of the most consequential sentences in the country's recent history. 3 words, just 3 words: subsidy is gone. Fuel prices exploded overnight. Transport costs surged by 200%. Millions of Nigerians who were already poor became desperately poor. The government told us, sacrifice now, gain later. The savings will go into infrastructure, education, healthcare, into your life, into your future. Fast forward to April 2026, nearly 3 years later, Nigeria's total public debt has risen to 159 trillion. President Tinubu has just asked the Senate to approve yet another fresh loan, this time $560 million from Deutsche Bank, to fund sections of the proposed Sokoto-Badagry Superhighway. And one of the most respected economic voices in this country, former Central Bank Governor and Emir of Kano, Mohammed Sanusi, too, has stood up this week and asked the very question every Nigerian should be screaming from their rooftops. If you remove the subsidy and saved the money, why are you still borrowing? Stay with me, because today we are going to follow the money. When Tinubu removed the fuel subsidy, his administration made very specific promises about what the savings would deliver. The government projected that nearly 10 billion would be freed up annually, with that physical space to be channeled into education, infrastructure, social investment, and healthcare. By late 2024, the Nigeria's presidency announced that subsidy removal has yielded annual savings of $7.5 billion. The government's own National Orientation Agency went even further, claiming the policy ended a historic financial drain that cost Nigeria over $84 billion and helped finance 40 critical road projects across the country in 2 years. The Senate Appropriation Committee chairman publicly stated that Nigeria was saving over 10 trillion naira annually. So the savings by the government's own account were enormous. The numbers were announced. The promises were made, which makes what comes next even harder to explain. When Tinubu inherited power on May 29, 2023, Nigeria's total public debt stood at approximately 49 trillion. That figure has since climbed to 159 trillion, meaning Nigeria's debt has increased by over 120 trillion in under 3 years. 120 trillion in new debt. During the same period, the government was supposedly banking trillions in subsidy savings. This debt now averages approximately 724,000 per Nigerian citizen, with debt servicing obligations projected at 15 trillion for 2026 alone. And if they were not enough, in March 2026, the Senate approved President Tinubu's request to secure fresh external loans totaling $6 billion aimed at plugging fiscal gaps and financing key infrastructure projects. Weeks later came the latest ask, the $516 million Dutch bank facility. The loan will run for 9 years, including a grace period of up to 3 years, with an interest rate capped at CME SOFR plus 5.3% per annum. Nigeria will be paying this back with interest deep into the 2030s. Now, a man who ran Nigeria's central bank, Sanusi, a man who sounded the alarm on public finance long before it was fashionable to do so. This week, he appeared on New Central TV and chose his words with precision of someone who has had enough. We have removed the subsidy. We are now spending it. What we should now see is fiscal consolidation. You cannot remove wastages and continue borrowing. I've said this before. You need to see the benefits. If you are not paying the subsidy and you have got the money, why are you still borrowing and borrowing? Why are we still borrowing and borrowing for? What are we borrowing for? These are not the words of a social media critic. This is a former Apex Bank governor publicly declaring that the arithmetic of this government does not add up. Sanusi also warned that introducing subsidy removal and exchanges liberation without first tightening monetary conditions placed additional pressure on the naira, describing it as a timing issue that worsened the very crisis the reforms were meant to fix. The government has offered explanation for where the money went. The National Orientation Agency says subsidy savings were used to clear a 7 billion foreign exchange backlog owed to foreign airlines and businesses, pay off 7 trillion in ways and means debt, and settles Nigerians' 3.2 billion IMF loan ahead of schedule. Those are real things and we acknowledge them. But here is what no government spokesman can explain away. FAC disbursements to federal and state and local government increased significantly since 2023, with record revenues shared across the 3 tiers of the government. But this windfall has not translated into reserve growth or tangible improvement in citizens' lives. Instead, fiscal leakages and wasteful spending and recurrent expenditure absorb much of the extra revenue. And critically, an October 2025 report by the Social Economic Rights Accountability Project found that despite 14 trillion of the subsidy savings shared across 36 states and the FCT, there has been little improvement in the infrastructure or public services. The money went into settling old debt. It went into palliatives. It vanished into FAC allocations across 36 states. And where it was supposed to transform Nigeria in hospitals, schools, and roads that ordinary Nigerians actually use, it simply did not arrive. But the most disturbing chapter of this story involves a man who tried to slow things down and paid with his job. Finance Minister Wale Adun explained that the government had stopped the practice of printing money to pay contractors and was focusing on debt servicing. He resisted. He pushed back. He tried to maintain some physical discipline inside an administration that appeared to have little appetite for it. Edun was not fired for releasing money recklessly. He was fired for not releasing it. In a government committed to borrowing without limit, Edun represented a constraint. Now that constraint is gone, and the very next day after his removal,
And I think
the
we must make that
516
decision.
million
It's
loan
not
request
enough to
landed
say,
on
"Oh,
the Senate
they
floor.
removed subsidy."
This loan, like many
when you get to a
before,
point where
was swiftly
100%
approved
of
by
your
a
revenue goes
Senate
into debt
that has
service,
abandoned any
you
pretense
cannot continue. Where
of
is the money going
physical
to come from?
scrutiny.
However,
Here
if you
is
decide to
where we
remove
land.
subsidy and you penalize
Nigerians
exchange
removed the
rate
fuel subsidy.
in an environment of
The pain
very
was real.
loose monetary
Fuel
conditions,
prices jumped by over
before you
500%.
have
Transport costs
tightened money
exploded.
supply, the
Inflation
naira drops
crushed
to a point of
households
despair.
and millions
Okay,
fell
so that was a
deeper
timing
into
issue.
poverty. The
Okay,
government said, endure the pain.
Secondly,
The savings will
we've
set
removed the
us free.
subsidy. We're
But
not spending
nearly
it.
3 years later,
What we should now see
the
is
debt
fiscal
has more than
consolidation.
tripled.
You cannot
The finance minister
remove
who tried to be
wastages and
responsible
continue
has been
borrowing.
shown the door. And the former
Higher
governor of the
thing,
central
and I've said
bank
this before.
is on national
So
television
you need to
asking
see
the most
the
basic
benefit. So
question
if
in
you're
public
not paying the
finance.
subsidy and you've
If
got
you
the
saved
money,
the money,
why are we
where
still
exactly is
borrowing
it?
and borrowing? But what are we
Sanusi
borrowing
has
for?
urged the government to provide clear accounting of revenues generated from subsidy removal and how those funds were allocated, stressing that transparency is essential to maintaining public trust. That is not a revolutionary demand, it is the minimum standard of governance. The Nigerian people paid for this subsidy removal with their hunger, their transport fares, and their sleepless nights. They deserve a full account, line by line, naira by naira, of where those trillions went. And until that accounting is made public and verified, every new loan request should be met with one simple, powerful, unanswered question. Where is the money? Until I see you in the next video, remain blessed.